January 22nd, 1760. The dusty plains outside Wandiwash, southern India. 4,300 British and sepoy troops faced an impossible strategic situation, outnumbered, isolated from reinforcement, and fighting for control of an entire subcontinent against Europe's most experienced colonial army. Behind them lay the brilliant victory at Plassey, where Robert Clive had secured Bengal's treasures for the East India Company. Ahead marched 6,800 French soldiers, and their Indian allies representing France's last chance to build an empire that could rival Britain's growing dominance in Asia. Between the company's survival and France's colonial ambitions stood Sir Eyre Coote, a professional soldier whose tactical genius would determine whether Britain or France controlled the jewel that would become the crown of empire. One artillery explosion would change everything. This is the story of Wandiwash, where British discipline conquered French fury, where superior tactics overcame numerical disadvantage, and where a single battle decided the fate of 200 million Indians. It's the engagement that transformed a trading company into the foundation of the largest empire in human history. The global struggle that brought European armies to Indian battlefields began in the drawing rooms of Versailles and the coffee houses of London. By 1760, the 7 Years' War had become history's first truly worldwide conflict, with British and French forces clashing from the forests of Canada to the sugar islands of the Caribbean, from the German plains to the trading ports of India. In India, this rivalry manifested as the Third Carnatic War, a direct extension of the European conflict that would determine which nation controlled the subcontinent's immense wealth. The stakes could not have been higher. Control of India meant access to textiles, spices, and precious metals that funded military campaigns across the globe. British advantages had been building steadily since Robert Clive's stunning victory at Plassey in 1757. That triumph gave the East India Company control of Bengal's revenues, creating a financial foundation that dwarfed anything France could provide from metropolitan resources. While British forces received regular pay and supplies funded by Indian taxation, French troops often fought for months without seeing their wages. The naval dimension proved equally critical. British control of Indian Ocean shipping lanes meant reliable communication and reinforcement from Europe, while French forces operated increasingly in isolation. When Admiral Dash withdrew the French fleet from Indian waters, he left French armies without naval support or guaranteed escape routes. These strategic advantages converged at Wandiwash, where superior logistics and consistent financing would prove as decisive as battlefield tactics. The French position, dependent entirely on the fortress of Pondicherry, represented everything wrong with their Indian strategy. Brilliant in conception, but fatally vulnerable to sustained British pressure. The personalities commanding these forces embodied their nation's different approaches to Indian warfare. Count Thomas Arthur de Lally represented French military excellence at its most conventional, a hero of Fontenoy, trained in European battlefield tactics, and supremely confident in the superiority of French arms against any Asian opponent. However, Lally's brilliance came with fatal flaws. His contempt for Indian political complexity and his refusal to work with local rulers alienated potential allies while creating unnecessary enemies. More damaging still was his bitter rivalry with the Marquis de Bussy, France's most successful Indian commander, whose diplomatic achievements Lally dismissed as corrupt, pandering to native interests. This internal conflict paralysed French strategic planning while undermining military efficiency. Lally's subordinates spent as much energy fighting each other as they did confronting British forces, creating exactly the disunity that professional opponents like Coote could exploit. Sir Eyre Coote embodied British military professionalism at its finest. Methodical, disciplined, and supremely competent in the technical aspects of 18th century warfare. Unlike Lally, Coote understood that victory in India required more than European military excellence. It demanded adaptation to local conditions and careful cultivation of Indian allies. Coote's greatest strength lay in his ability to maintain unit cohesion under the most challenging conditions. His troops trusted his judgment completely, knowing that his tactical decisions prioritized their survival while maximizing enemy casualties. This confidence proved invaluable in the psychological pressures of colonial warfare. The contrast between the two commanders reflected deeper differences in British and French colonial philosophy. Where Lally sought to impose European methods wholesale, Coote adapted European techniques to Indian realities, creating hybrid approaches that proved devastatingly effective against conventional opponents. By early 1760, French strategy had narrowed to a desperate gamble: capture the fortress of Wandiwash to relieve pressure on Pondicherry, while demonstrating that French arms could still challenge British dominance. The plan reflected sound strategic thinking, but its execution would test French capabilities against Britain's most competent Indian commander. Lally's decision to concentrate his forces at Wandiwash created exactly the confrontation Coote had hoped to avoid: a major battle where numerical inferiority could prove decisive. However, Coote recognised that French logistics were more fragile than French numbers suggested, making sustained combat favourable to British interests. The force dispositions revealed both armies' strengths and critical vulnerabilities. French numerical superiority seemed decisive on paper, but deeper analysis suggested different conclusions. Lally commanded approximately 6,850 troops, including 2,250 European infantry, 300 European cavalry, 1,300 sepoys, and 3,000 Indian horse, supported by 16 artillery pieces. Coote's smaller force totaled 4,300 men, 1,900 European infantry, 2,100 sepoys, 80 European cavalry, and 250 Indian horsemen, backed by 26 guns. The British artillery advantage, though seemingly modest, reflected superior training and equipment that would prove decisive in sustained combat. More importantly, British forces enjoyed superior discipline and morale. Coote's troops had been paid regularly from Bengal revenues, while Lally's men suffered from chronic wage arrears that undermined unit cohesion. French soldiers fought knowing their government had failed to provide adequate support, while British troops served with confidence in their institutional backing. The tactical doctrines employed by each army represented centuries of military evolution adapted to Indian conditions. Lally relied on traditional French methods: massive column formations designed to overwhelm enemy positions through shock action and psychological pressure. These ordre profonde tactics had proven devastatingly effective in European warfare, where concentrated force could shatter conventional defensive lines. Coote employed the British ordre mince system: thin, extended lines that maximise firepower while maintaining tactical flexibility. Every soldier in the formation could fire simultaneously, creating devastating volleys that no column formation could withstand at close range. This tactical philosophy would later dominate Napoleonic battlefields under Wellington's command. The battle began at dawn with intensive artillery duels that immediately favoured British gunners. Superior training and equipment allowed British batteries to achieve greater accuracy and faster rates of fire, systematically destroying French artillery positions while maintaining their own effectiveness. Lally's response demonstrated both his tactical skill and strategic limitations. Unable to match British artillery performance, he ordered his cavalry to charge British positions, hoping to scatter enemy formations before his artillery disadvantage became decisive. The assault initially showed promise as French horsemen closed rapidly with British lines. However, British disciplinary training proved superior to French tactical innovation. Coote's sepoys, steadied by European officers and strengthened by months of professional drill, maintained perfect formation while delivering coordinated volleys that shattered the French cavalry attack. The psychological impact of this repulse spread throughout Lally's army. The engagement's decisive moment came when a British artillery shell struck a French ammunition wagon or powder magazine behind Lally's lines. The massive explosion created instant chaos throughout the French left wing, killing dozens of soldiers while scattering others in panic and confusion. Coote recognised this opportunity immediately, ordering his infantry to advance with fixed bayonets, while French units remained disorganised by the explosion's effects. British discipline proved decisive as regiment after regiment maintained perfect formation, while closing with demoralised French troops. The capture of the Marquis de Bussy during this advance dealt a crushing blow to French morale. As France's most respected Indian commander and Lally's most competent subordinate, Bussy's loss deprived French forces of their best tactical leader, while demonstrating to Indian observers that French military dominance was ending. Lally's efforts to rally his troops proved futile against sustained British pressure. The Lally Regiment, composed of Irish soldiers in French service, fought with desperate courage but could not withstand the methodical advance of British formations supported by superior artillery fire. The battle's conclusion saw French forces retreating in disorder towards Pondicherry, abandoning their artillery and leaving hundreds of prisoners in British hands. Coote had achieved exactly the decisive victory that would establish British supremacy throughout southern India. The tactical lessons of Wandiwash extended far beyond immediate military consequences to influence British military doctrine throughout the imperial period. The battle validated techniques that would characterise British success in colonial warfare. Superior discipline, coordinated fire support, and professional leadership that maintained unit effectiveness under extreme conditions. The engagement also demonstrated the importance of financial resources in sustaining military operations across vast distances. British victory resulted as much from Bengal's taxation as from battlefield excellence, proving that colonial warfare required economic foundations as well as tactical competence. Most significantly, Wandiwash established tactical principles that would define British military culture for generations. The combination of disciplined firepower, aggressive leadership, and systematic coordination between different combat arms became hallmarks of British imperial expansion worldwide. The artillery performance at Wandiwash particularly influenced future British military development. Superior gunnery training and equipment maintenance proved decisive advantages that British commanders would emphasise throughout subsequent colonial campaigns. This technical excellence became a trademark of British military professionalism. The battle's strategic consequences transformed the entire balance of power in India while establishing patterns that would characterise British imperial expansion for the next century. French dreams of an Indian empire died at Wandiwash, leaving Britain as the dominant European presence throughout the subcontinent. Coote's systematic follow-up operations demonstrated how tactical victories could produce lasting strategic results. The siege and capture of Pondicherry in 1761 eliminated French military power in India, while providing object lessons in the importance of sustained pressure against isolated enemy positions. The 1763 Treaty of Paris formalised what Wandiwash had decided on the battlefield. France retained only small trading posts without military significance, while Britain gained undisputed control of Indian political and economic development. This diplomatic arrangement reflected military realities established by superior British performance in sustained combat. The human cost of victory provided sobering context for strategic success. British casualties, though lighter than French losses, represented irreplaceable professional soldiers whose training and experience could not be quickly replaced in colonial settings. However, these losses proved strategically acceptable, given the enormous advantages gained. French casualties included not just immediate battle deaths, but the collapse of institutional morale that made further resistance impossible. Lally's forces had been France's best hope for Indian success. Their defeat at Wandiwash effectively ended serious French military efforts throughout the region. For British public opinion, Wandiwash provided essential validation of East India Company expansion beyond mere commercial activity. The victory demonstrated that British arms could triumph over European opponents in any environment, justifying continued investment in Indian operations. Parliamentary critics who questioned the wisdom of extensive Indian involvement found their arguments undermined by undeniable success. Wandiwash proved that colonial expansion could produce both military glory and financial profit, creating political momentum for further territorial acquisition. The battle established Sir Eyre Coote's reputation as one of Britain's most capable colonial commanders, while providing practical experience for officers who would later serve throughout the expanding empire. This institutional learning became a crucial advantage in subsequent British military operations. The engagement also validated East India Company military organisation against professional European opposition. Company troops had proven they could defeat the best forces France could deploy in India, establishing confidence that would characterise British imperial expansion for generations. Count de Lally's tragic fate illustrated the human cost of strategic failure, while highlighting fundamental differences between British and French approaches to colonial warfare. His execution for treason in 1766 reflected French frustration at losing India, though his individual failings were less significant than systemic weaknesses in French imperial organisation. Lally's court-martial and execution created lasting controversy in France, while providing cautionary lessons about the political risks of colonial command. British officers noted these events carefully, recognising that imperial success required not just tactical competence, but political wisdom in managing metropolitan expectations. The contrast between Lally's fate and Coote's rewards demonstrated how military success translated into personal advancement within British imperial culture. Coote's knighthood and continued employment reflected institutional recognition of professional competence, encouraging similar excellence among other officers. These personnel policies created systematic advantages that compounded British military effectiveness throughout the imperial period. Officers who succeeded in colonial warfare received recognition and advancement, while failure carried professional rather than personal consequences, encouraging aggressive but calculated risk-taking. Wandiwash's significance extended beyond immediate military consequences to influence the entire trajectory of Indian historical development. British victory established political and economic patterns that would characterise Indian society for the next 2 centuries, while providing foundations for modern South Asian geopolitical arrangements. The battle marked the beginning of systematic British territorial expansion throughout India, as East India Company officials recognised that political control provided more reliable profits than mere commercial activity. This realisation transformed company policy from trade to conquest, with enormous consequences for both British and Indian societies. Military lessons learned at Wandiwash influenced British tactical development throughout subsequent colonial campaigns. The effectiveness of disciplined firepower against numerically superior opponents became a cornerstone of British imperial military doctrine, applied successfully from Africa to Asia. The engagement also established logistical principles that would characterise British colonial administration: the importance of reliable financial foundations, systematic supply arrangements, and professional military organisation capable of sustained operations across vast distances. For the broader development of British imperial culture, Wandiwash provided essential validation of institutional superiority over European competitors. The victory demonstrated that British methods could triumph in any environment, creating confidence that would drive territorial expansion across multiple continents. The battle's influence on British military tradition proved equally lasting. Regiment honours, tactical manuals, and officer training all reflected lessons learned during the Indian campaigns, while successful commanders like Coote became models for future generations of imperial officers. Modern military historians recognise Wandiwash as a decisive engagement that fundamentally altered the balance of global power. British control of India provided resources and strategic positions that would prove crucial during the Napoleonic Wars and subsequent imperial expansion. The battle demonstrated how relatively small military actions could produce enormous historical consequences when conducted at critical moments in favourable strategic circumstances. Coote's tactical excellence, supported by superior logistics and institutional backing, determined the fate of hundreds of millions of people. For understanding British imperial development, Wandiwash represents the moment when commercial expansion transformed into territorial empire. The victory provided both the confidence and resources necessary for systematic conquest throughout the subcontinent. The engagement also illustrates the importance of professional military competence in determining historical outcomes. Individual leadership quality, tactical innovation, and institutional effectiveness combined to produce results that shaped global development for centuries afterward. The Battle of Wandiwash stands as testament to what British military professionalism could achieve under the most challenging conditions. Coote's tactical genius, supported by disciplined troops and superior resources, established the foundations of empire that would endure for 2 centuries. In the dusty plains outside a small Indian fortress, British arms had proven their superiority over European rivals while establishing patterns of conquest that would span the globe. The empire on which the sun never set began with victories like Wandiwash, where professional excellence triumphed over numerical odds to change the course of world history.